Hi everybody, welcome to the 9th video in this series on the operatic voice. We've come a long way. Today we'll be discussing the bass voice. Now this lecture series is a comprehensive overview of classical singing voices and how gender comes into their categorization, especially in opera narratives with stock characters. I'm interested in how to approach writing for opera singers today in a world where gender is not considered as binary, potentially as it was in the past. Although I have something to say about that, which I'll get into in a later video in this series. Anyway, this isn't supposed to be a definitive guide on the operatic voice, but it's a good general guide for myself and other composers and anyone wanting to study the voice. It's not a quick how-to video, it's a video you're supposed to sit down with a cup of tea or whatever you want and just enjoy and have a laugh and learn with me. As I keep saying, it's absurd to categorise everyone's voice into these labels, but they do, however, help us to understand vocal capabilities better. And we must remember that people are constantly changing and evolving, and they can't be restrained by a mere category, and as such there will be exceptions to every rule and category that we discuss in these videos, and in theory every rule and category that exists in the whole of literature on the operatic classical singing voice. Without further ado, let's discuss the bass singing voice. Let's get right to the point and discuss the vocal characteristics and general range of the bass voice. The bass is the lowest male singing voice. According to sfopera.com, the bass male singing voice has a tone, colour and range that is similar to that of a trombone or bassoon. As a composer, that fascinates me. The bass is a classical male singing voice and the lowest vocal range of all singing voices. Okay. Its vocal range generally lies between E2 to E4, with an extreme low at C2. Depends who you meet though, doesn't it? Let's have a look at the character types. Depending on the type of opera, bass voices are typically used to suggest wisdom or simply a very old character. According to Richard Miller in his book Securing Baritone, Bass-Baritone and Bass Voices, which I found very useful in just clearing up a few things, he writes this: among all low voiced categories of the singing voice, the true bass is the most rare. His sonorous depth of quality is impressive. Much of his literature demands the same degree of velocity as that required of higher, lighter voices. The spectrum of roles for the bass covers a wide range from respected elder to sensuous lover. In addition, the bass Buffo literature represents a major facet of potential repertoire, and much of the oratorio literature for low voice is the property of the bass singer. Now, let's look at the subcategories and vocal ranges. The bass is subdivided into subcategories, believe it or not. However, unlike the other voice type categories, the bass is partitioned according... Okay, now, this is where it gets weird. Right. Unlike the other voice categories that we've discussed, the bass is partitioned according to national flavour instead of a single classification system. What that means is that different nations or nationalities or countries or whatever have categorised the voice in different ways, and there's not one unified or single classification system, which means that there's so much overlap and confusion between different voice subcategories of the bass. In Italy, the bass category is divided into 3 subcategories that include Basso Cantante, Basso Buffo and Basso Profundo. Of these, Basso Profundo is lowest in the bass repertoire, and it spans from C2 to C4 but can extend down to an extreme low note of G1 or F1. Now, the American system subdivided the bass into 4 subcategories: bass-baritone, comic bass, lyric bass and dramatic bass. And then we have the German fach system, and this features further variations that include Spielbass, or Basso Buffo, schwere Spielbass, literally severe Basso Buffo, character bass, bass-baritone, and serioser bass. These subclassifications under the bass category may at times overlap with each other, understandably. So regardless of who came up with the classification, these different sets of classifications that we've just looked at, the Italian, the American and the German, they overlap with each other. And it is very rare that a bass singer singing in one voice type will not touch another voice type. Now, in addition, there is a term called an octavist, which is a term for a very low bassi profundi who can sing an octave below the bass line in choral music when called for. Oh, I see, so he's an octavist. He sings an octave below. Makes sense, but you can sing an octave below the bass line. That's deep. As I've said, these classification systems can overlap. Rare is the performer who embodies a single fach without also touching repertoire from another category. That makes sense. famous bass roles include Don Pizarro from Beethoven's Fidelio and Dr. Bartolo from Rossini's The Barber of Seville. According to sfopera.com, one of the most famous bass opera roles is Philip II in Verdi's Don Carlo. The definition of a basso cantante is a bass voice with a well-developed upper range. Basso cantante means singing bass. Basso cantante is a higher, more lyrical voice. It is produced using a more Italianate vocal production and possesses a faster vibrato than its closest German or Anglo-Saxon equivalent, the bass-baritone, which we've looked at in the previous video. Examples of basso cantante roles include Duke Bluebeard in Bluebeard's Castle by Bela Bartok, Don Giovanni in Don Giovanni by Mozart, Figaro in The Marriage of Figaro by Mozart. On to the Hoher bass now, or the dramatic high bass, or the dramatic bass baritone. We have some examples of the dramatic bass baritone or high bass in roles that include Igor, Prince Igor by Alexander Borodin, Boris in Boris Godunov by Mussorgsky, Wotan in Der Ring des Nibelungen by Richard Wagner, and Banco in Macbeth by Giuseppe Verdi. The Jugendlicher Bass,
Jugendlicher,
juvenile bass, denotes the role of a young man sung by a bass, regardless of the age of the singer. Now, example roles of the Jugendlicher Bass
Jugendlicher,
include Massetto in Don Giovanni by Mozart and Colline in La Bohème by Giacomo Puccini. Let's look at the basso buffo now, also known as the funny bass or comic bass or Spielbass. So the definition of a basso buffo is a bass singer of comic roles in opera. Nearly every classic Italian comic opera has a basso buffo. He wears a false nose, false belly, or both, and is not expected to have much of a voice. The basso buffo singers are given roles such as Don Bartolo in Il Barbiere di Seville in The Barber of Seville. We also have Don Magnifico in La Cenerentola. There are many more, but those are a couple of solid examples of roles that these types of singers are assigned. The characters in the buffo roles are often older men, once well respected in society, or complete quacks like Dr. Dulcamera in L'Elixir d'Amour. They also tend to get pushed around a lot and boast constantly about how important they are. Let's look at the vocal characteristics and range of this basso buffo. A singer classified as a basso buffo often sounds more like a baritone than other types of basses. Buffo roles sit very high for basses, sometimes going above the normal bass range of approximately the second E on the piano to the fourth E on the piano above middle C. Buffo singers do not necessarily possess the greatest voices, but have great pattering skills and acting skills. Pattering is basically singing syllables very fast. Often patters are tongue twisters, which makes it even more difficult to pull off. The Spielbass, basso buffo, is technically similar to other bass facher, but is lighter than the Schweitzer bass, and they have a straight tone apparently. The Spielbass and bass buffo bear a relationship that is similar to that of the Spiel tenor and the tenor buffo. Let's look at the lyric buffo now. Basso buffo, lyric buffo. So buffo literally means funny, and lyric buffo roles are lyrical roles that demand from their practitioners a solid coloratura technique. They must have a capacity for patter singing and ripe tonal qualities if they are to be brought off to maximum effect. Now, what is a patter song, you may be wondering? The patter song is characterised by a moderately fast to very fast tempo with a rapid succession of rhythmic patterns in which each syllable of text corresponds to one note. It is a staple of comic opera, especially Gilbert and Sullivan, but it also has been used in musicals and elsewhere. The lyric of a patter song generally features tongue-twisting rhyming text with alliterative words and other consonant or vowel sounds that are intended to be entertaining to listen to at rapid speed. So examples are I Am the Very Model of a Modern Major General, often referred to as the Major General song or Modern Major General song. This is a patter song from Gilbert and Sullivan's 1879 comic opera The Pirates of Penzance. So these roles, lyric buffos, are usually the blustering antagonist of the hero or heroine, or the comic relief fool in bel canto operas, for example. Basically, bel canto is a lyrical style of operatic singing using a full, rich, broad tone and smooth phrasing. Examples of basso buffo or lyric buffo roles include Don Magnifico in La Cenerentola by Rossini, Don Alfonso in Cose fan tutte by Mozart, Leporello in Don Giovanni by Mozart, and the Doctor in Wojciech by Alban Berg. Let's now look at the basso profundo and lyric basso profundo. The basso profundo is a deep, heavy bass voice with an exceptionally low range. And the lyric basso profundo is a lyric low bass. Now, from all my research into this, lyric tends to refer to voice types that are, well, lyrical, lighter, not coloratura, which would be more virtuosic, able to sing florid passages. That's in terms of the soprano voices and the mezzo-soprano voices, the higher ranges basically. But there's a contradiction here because in the lyric buffo section that I've just talked about, comic lyric, that requires singers to use coloratura's technique in patterns and so on. So lyric here crosses boundaries into coloratura when it gets to the lower ranges. It seems that the lower down the voice categories we go in terms of pitch, the less segmented the categories seem to be, the less disparate they seem to be. There's more vagueness and crossover the deeper down you go in terms of pitch of voice. The possibilities for categorization are endless, and it'll be difficult to find that you can categorize everyone's voices easily. There's going to be exceptions and variations and so on. The basso profundo is the lowest bass voice type, apparently. According to J.B. Steen in Voices, Singers and Critics, the basso profundo voice derives from a method of tone production that eliminates the more Italian quick vibrato. According to the Opera House Gazetteer, in its place is a kind of tonal solidity, a wall-like front which may nevertheless prove susceptible to the other kind of vibrato, the slow beat or dreaded wobble. So you can imagine that, can't you? Okay, so that's what the basso profundo does. It's so low that it does that. And examples of roles include Rocco in Fidelio by Ludwig van Beethoven, Sarastro in Die Zauberflöte by Mozart, Baron Ochs in Der Rosenkavalier by Richard Strauss. And that's my examples for now. Now let's look at the dramatic bass. So after compiling all the research into this, it seems that the dramatic bass is also called the schwere Spielbass, or the dramatic buffo. Another term used for this is the dramatic basso profundo, so there's lots of overlap here. Once you've studied one bass, you've studied them all, I guess. Dramatic tends to refer to a voice type that is heavier than others, think Wagner. Roles for the schwere Spielbass or dramatic buffo include Khan Konchak in Prince Igor by Alexander Borodin, Ferrando in Il Trovatore by Giuseppe Verdi, Daland in Der Fliegende Holländer by Richard Wagner. Now let's look at the dramatic basso profundo. The dramatic basso profundo is a powerful basso profundo voice. The basso profundo is a basso profundo voice. I know all about it now. The English equivalent is dramatic low bass. Examples include Il Commendatore in Don Giovanni, Hagen in Götterdämmerung by Richard Wagner, Hunding in Die Walküre by Richard Wagner. We also have the Grand Inquisitor, Don Carlo. Already you can see there's a lot of Wagner in this section. I found the bass voice and its subcategories to be more vague than the other voice types in this series. It might be because different countries and nations have categorised the voice slightly differently. There isn't a single classification system, is there? Or, in other words, more than the other voice types, the bass seems to be subcategorised more variably depending on which nation's perspective you're thinking from. There also tends to be less easily available information on the bass voice, which makes finding a clear definition and exploration of the bass voice harder to do. But to summarise, in this video we've looked at the bass voice and some of its subcategories. We've certainly looked at it, haven't we? We've touched on the Basso Cantante, the singing bass, the Basso Buffo, the lyric Buffo, the Basso Profundo and lyric Basso Profundo, the dramatic bass and the dramatic Basso Profundo. Stay tuned for the next video in this series where we'll be discussing trans voices and unravelling the categorisations of voice types even more, in terms of gender at least. We'll know in terms of everything probably. Anyway, I'll see you there. Onto the Hoher bass now, dramatic high bass, or the ha ha.